And welcome back to the Boundary Corner podcast, along with my partner, Brian Stiegler. I am Curtis Wilson. We are a part of the College Huddle Network. And this episode, as always, is brought to you by Dr. Jeremy Counts down at Counts Family Pharmacy, your friendly neighborhood pharmacy, 301 South Main Street in Blacksburg. Brian, just me and you tonight, it seems. Like Tally was a late tap out for us.
Tally was a late tap out. We might get him at the end here. We'll see. But we're riding a duo for now, about to be a trio in a couple minutes here. We have a pretty fun guest tonight. Curtis, you been busy, man? I know it's been a couple weeks since we tapped in here.
Busy? Dude, everybody's playing baseball. I got home at almost 10 o'clock last night from a scrimmage. The middle one starts this week. We got a game this weekend. We got a practice this weekend. Look who showed up.
Hey.
You ain't that late.
Hell and high water. I fucking thought 9 o'clock. I seen 9 and thought 9 my time. And then when you like, oh, I'm almost in, I'm like, why the fuck would he be in so early? Oh, fuck, man.
Alabama problems, man. Alabama.
Well, Tally, he just asked if I'm busy. I've been at the baseball field all week. How about you?
Well, baseball, we had baseball this week because it's spring break.
Oh,
but
okay.
I feel like spring break is worse for me because there's so much other shit that happens. Kids are trying to go places. Work has been very busy, which is a good thing.
Yes,
so with me working from home, I've learned that my sweet spot is getting on early and staying late. So it sucks to have to do that, but my sales reflect that it's beneficial to do that. So I'm supposed to be on by 7:45 in the morning. I've been getting on at 6:45. And usually when everybody else gets on, I've already got about $1,000 worth of sales for that day. And like our quota, our quota is like 2,500 for the day is what you really want to be at. So I've been hanging around since the weather's kind of better. I've been hanging around about 35 to 4,000 a day.
Hey, there you go. So you closing about half your day before people even show up.
Right. Yeah. And they're pissed. Them dudes that have to go to the office have been mad. Like, he's getting on at 6:30. We can't do that. Like, well,
too bad. So sad.
Too bad. So sad.
Exactly.
You doing business? What about you, Brian? You been busy?
Man, not quite drinking from the fire hose quite as much as I was with the new position, but still rocking and rolling. Kind of starting to settle in a little bit. Had a little fun, little happy hour tonight. Got some dinner. Went up to Easy Burger. Got some brews at Ardent. All my RVA folks know what I'm talking about here. So
exactly, great burger, great.
It was a good trip. Got a good burger. Got a couple beers in me. Had some good times with some coworkers and headed home and got this thing ready to roll.
Well, we are ready to roll. And tonight, look, we lost Tally already. And tonight, it's a fun one. We are going to be having, if you have ever read The Key Play, which probably everybody out there watching, listening has, Frenching from the Bench, that's what it was titled long time ago. Some of the best write-ups about scheme, technique, and what was going on with the Hokies. Well, he is joining us. And I can remember, Brian, probably when we started this thing 5 years ago, me and you talked like one day we got to have him on. And why not now? So for everybody out there, I'm going to say this. If you're listening to the podcast, I'm highly suggesting you go to YouTube and watch it because we're going to have some screenshots and some things as French pointing us out, a few things. But without further ado, from The Key Play, writer and analyst, they call him French. French, how you doing tonight, man?
I am upright and ambulatory, so that's better than I can say for Justin Fuente's coaching career. So
coming in with the jokes hot.
Zinger right out the gate. Love that.
Sorry. After seeing him at Kabuki's talking with Vance Weiss in the corner instead of talking to this top running back recruit, never forgave him.
There you go. Respect on that. Well, French, we appreciate you coming on with us tonight and breaking down this new defenses of Sam Siefkes. Y'all know I'm going to butcher that name so much, except if he ever
You're right there with me. I've misspelled it 40 times already.
Yeah. If he ever comes on, I'm literally going to have the pronunciation guy to the right.
Yeah, I've got to start doing better in the notes, man. I got to put everything phonetically in there so that we're good.
That's all I'm gonna say. Long joke, but we're gonna get into it tonight. You've got some things obviously to go, but French, give us a little bit of your background, how you became a Virginia Tech fan, it and when you played, where you played collegiate ball, what positions. Give a little bit about yourself to the folks out there
Sure.
who may not know who you are.
Embarrassing history. Now, I grew up in Abingdon, Virginia, and didn't play any kind of organized football other than flag football until I was a freshman in high school. Wanted to be a wide receiver. I was a chubby kid. I wasn't going to get to play wide receiver, so I focused on doing other stuff. A colleague of my mom, whose son was the starting quarterback on the varsity when I was an eighth grader, kind of harangued me into going out for JV and didn't know what I was doing. I was a just blocking bag getting flown around. I had no idea how to even take contact. And fortunately had a good experience there running wing T offense. And tore up my ankle right after we lost to Gate City in the 95 playoffs. Team that had Jake Housewright, Chad Beasley, Josh Shoemaker played basketball at Wake Forest. I was 6'9", playing quarterback. And like 3 days later, I had a hunting accident where I tore up my ankle. So I figured I'd send to sports. And I went to Emory and Henry. It was close to home, felt good about being there. And after a year, I said, man, I can play with some of those guys. So I talked to Coach Fred Self, who was the longtime offensive coordinator and offensive line coach there, and ended up working out in the spring and played. Back then everybody dressed out, but I actually got to play in the very first game I ever dressed out. We played Washington and Jefferson. They were ranked 6th in the country. They came down to Emory, and our tailback, Oliver Jordan, who ended up making All-American that year, had a huge game, so good that even a scrub like me got to play. So I played 3 years at Emory after missing that first year, and was kind of the undersized guy who knew all the blocking assignments. And they tried to make me a center. I never could get snapping down. But God bless centers. You guys know Jay Cole from Halifax County. I don't know how those guys were able to do it, but I always struggled, particularly with shotgun snaps. But I played every other position at one point or the other on the offensive line. And most of my last year when I was, getting to play a little bit more, it was at right guard, running I formation offense. And at the same time, when I was a kid, Virginia Tech was a non-entity in football. I was right on the Tennessee-Virginia state line. We got Tennessee games. I didn't see a Virginia Tech game on TV until they beat UVA the year that Sean Moore was quarterback, and UVA had been ranked number 1, and they had a game on ESPN. So they were a non-entity. By the time 93 comes around and they start to get that, reputation, the defense, the special teams, all that, they had an identity that I liked, sort of underdog. We're going to hit you in the mouth. We're going to work harder in the weight room type of stuff. And they built on that. And it was an easy team to root for, especially being close to home. So that's really where my fandom came from. And ended up after college, living in Northern Virginia for a while with a bunch of VT grads. That brought me more into the fandom rather than, sort of the analytical watching. I could, drink fish bowls and watch Marcus Vick flip off West Virginia fans. But I was away then when they moved, like I was away from anybody at Talk Sports. So 2010 comes around and Hokies played Stanford in the bowl game, and I was really pissed about how that went. And I had an account on, I can't even remember the website. It might have been Gobbler Country, and I forgot my password. And I went over to the key play and wrote up here's my thoughts about how that Stanford game went out. And Joe, the editor of the key play that summer, asked me if I wanted to do film reviews. He said, I'll provide the tape. So all you've got to do is tell me where the clips are and then write, what you think of the clips. And the whole idea of me doing it was I got really irritated sitting in a sports bar or in the seats of the game, and people were like, hit that guy. And they had or the offensive line didn't block anybody. And it may have had nothing to do with the offensive line, the play getting blown up. And I just said, okay, I'm arrogant enough that I'll tell everybody what I think's really happening. And Lord knows people called me an asshole a bunch of times. I don't know what I'm talking about. Sometimes I do, sometimes don't. Don't have any insider perspective. And somehow that's turned into doing it for, goodness, we're on year 14 of doing it. So that's pretty much my story. I haven't coached any. So I try to come at it from how do I talk about this in a way that I can get technical enough that a fan will understand. And I try to stay away from, I know you guys have probably done a little coaching, but there are a lot of coaches who think that they're curing cancer or they're geniuses, and they'll talk above you or talk over your head the whole time. And the reality is, like, dude, all you're doing is, when you say all that terminology, you just mean taking on a block with your right shoulder rather than your left shoulder. Like, you can simplify it, make it easy. You don't have to. And Coach Self was a big influence on me because I learned more from him probably my first week of the first set of two-a-days at Emory than I'd learned but knew about football for my entire life up to that point. So I've always tried to share things the way he did.
Yeah.
Brent, go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead, Sally. You good?
I was just gonna say I'm gonna throw something at you. This wasn't on a rundown or anything, but just listen to your story, how you got started, and that's pretty cool. But I'll ask, over your years of watching Virginia Tech football, what's the maddest that you've been watching a game? Like, which game was it? I know you can pick any year, but try to narrow it down to one.
Well, there's at least one every year.
I can tell you one because I was so emotionally invested in it. And it wasn't because of what happened on the field. It was the Boise State game. And it wasn't that they blew the lead, although you watched it in person. It definitely looked like Boise sort of had the finger on the pulse on how to manipulate Bud's defense into creating space for them to throw the ball. But what drove me nuts, it's first down. Virginia Tech's got the ball on the last drive, and they hand off to, I think it was Evans, and there was a fumble, and they recovered it. They got like 2 or 3 yards. And they're 2 plays away, get a first down, the game's probably over.
Yep.
And the fellow Hokies fan base, people around me start chanting overrated. And I just was like, you don't fuck. As a former player, like, you don't fuck with.
Don't tempt.
You don't do things. You don't tempt the gods, because the gods will strike thunder down upon you. And sure enough, they didn't get the first down. And Kellen Moore comes down, wins the game. I've never been so angry.
Can I ask a question about the third down play though? Was it 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4? It was not a long play.
It was 3rd.
Did you throw things at FedEx Field when Brian Steinspring decided to go for a shot with David Wilson, Darren Evans, Ryan Williams, and Tyrod Taylor all in the backfield? Because I was up to 3 o'clock in the morning talking to my buddy Biff in San Diego because we were so fucking pissed.
I guess that might have been Curtis's game too.
And here's the thing. I was so seeing red because of the chanting. You now saying that, I didn't even remember that they threw deep on that play. I was just, all I could remember was the taunting and the timing of it, and thinking the karma gods are just going to screw us. I was convinced on 2nd down they were losing the game because of that. I'm weird about that with momentum. And, I went from at Emory, we didn't lose a home game. We had won for years before I showed up, but we had won something like 56 straight home games. We believed in winning. We had games where we played like absolute crap, and we would pull something out. We won a game. I think we blocked a field goal against Washington. No, it was Bridgewater late in the game. Like, I was sort of bred to believe you were going to win, but my high school program wasn't great. So that kind of creeped back in when I became a fan and started to believe bad things were going to happen. I'm a New York Rangers fan, hockey, and nothing's good has happened for my team for 30 years now. So I've sort of got accustomed to expecting the worst. And there was just something about that moment that triggered. Like, I stood in my seat and started pacing back and forth in my little 12 inches of space. These stupid sons of bitches. Don't they know? You don't do this. You don't do this.
French, you sound like you had a
Costner,
similar.
If you're winning because you're getting laid or you're not getting laid, then you are.
Yep.
Leave it alone.
Don't
mess
tempt
with
it. Don't push it. Don't push it.
Yeah,
French, it sounds like you had a similar.
Game's over. Chant it all you want.
Yeah.
Send the poor folks back to Idaho.
That's
First
right.
time they'd ever left anyway.
Sounds like you had a similar high school and college setup to me because we lost a lot in high school, and then I got to Hampton Sydney, and that was in the run where Hampton Sydney was playing some really good football early in the Marty Favret tenure there, and
I miss their old coaches because that was a game where us scrubs always got to play like half the game was playing Hampton Sydney. But Coach Wacker was going nuts for that. God damn it! Don't you know what day this is? He had that real bad lisp.
Yeah,
you'll see him getting voted into the. I think there's a YouTube video of him getting in the Hall of Fame, and he's got the lisp going, and he would that week. Boy, he was fired up because he'd been the coach at Hampton Sydney.
Exactly,
and he was out for blood. We were all like, "This is patty cake week. This is," we weren't worried about it. That was definitely not the sharpest week of practice.
I'm sure. We had a similar setup when we were playing Guilford. I know Guilford kind of turned it around in the last decade or so and kind of came a pretty good team there, but they were really down in the early 2000s. Bridgewater was kind of our bugaboo when we were there. They were coming off
Jason Lutz era.
Yeah, coming off a Stag
we were
Bowl.
The beginning of it. That game with a field goal. That was his first game as a starter.
Yeah, they were coming off that Stag Bowl appearance when I first got there. They were a really good football team. And you talk about momentum. We had a game in 2003 when we played them. We were, statistically, from an NCAA standpoint, we scored the most points per game across all divisions that year. And they came into Farmville, into Hampton Sydney there, and man, we dominated them in the first half, and then left points on the field at the half, and then flipped it. And then when they came out in the second half, just a completely different team. First, they kicked off to us. They kicked it short. We kind of misfielded. They jumped on it. They went down and scored. And it just felt like the shift in the momentum. And we just never really got our footing back. And then we got some tough calls at the end there that kind of went the wrong way. And that was the only loss that season. It was a 3-point loss, and everybody felt it, and it kept us out of the playoffs. So it was
momentum's a weird thing, man. And it's the things that happen. Like I said, you don't do anything to mess with it. So some of the penalty stuff, it's not always like the penalties you get or the mistakes. It's when they happen, and you're just watching the game, and there's especially guys that played. You just feel it like, oh shit. You get up 3 scores, and you just go, oh no. Not the time.
Oh man, you would probably be like us watching a game. We could probably all 4 sit in a room together and watch a game, or in the stands, and we would have similar demeanor. So
y'all wouldn't have any fun with me. I'm miserable watching. People say I look like I'm getting ready to have a stroke. I don't talk. I'm sitting there biting my teeth.
Well, you gotta have the variety because I'm loud and I don't care.
Curtis is animated. He's
I'm animated.
Up, sit down, stand up, sit down.
Yeah, I'm up and down. Tally. I guess Tally leans negative.
Yeah,
I say you lean negative. The game we watched together.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian, I don't know what you are. I've watched games with you for years. You're to me, you're all over the place. You can be high.
It depends. It depends on what I'm seeing, man. Sometimes I can get really animated into it. Sometimes I'm sitting there and thinking it through and what the fuck happened? We got to fix that. And then sometimes I'm just so in my own nerves that I'm not really even talking about anything. So
the worst is when they're playing poorly, and I know I've got to write about it. And so if I say anything nice, then I'm going to have people saying that I'm just kissing up, or I'm not being objective. And then if I blister everybody, then I'm treating the kids like garbage, and there's no happy middle ground there.
No, there isn't.
I try to be honest about it, and I've had a lot of former players and guys who were playing at the time would reach out to me and say, yeah, pretty much got that one, and some cases didn't. I'm not going to say who it was, but I had a player texting me the morning of the Purdue game up in Lafayette. That was one of the games I traveled to, and was telling me, it's like, we're going to go after a punt today. He was involved in the punt block in that game. He said, we're going to go after one today. Look for this, this, and this. So, I won't reveal who that was, but some of the players will give me some positive information. Other ones I heard are not particularly, or former players are not particularly fond of me. I can think of a couple of offensive linemen who I've heard don't like me very much. One of them rhymes with Ronti. So Richmond guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We know you're talking about
Well,
that.
it's some that we don't like either. So
Yeah.
there
is.
And it rhymes
They're
with
nice guys. Most of the former players I've met have been wonderfully nice to me. So
Same.
Even James Gale, who he and I had a little bit of a Twitter spat there after the Duke game his last year, and he came up and asked me when I was going to find some frozen fish at the grocery store, because that's all I ever held up in my pictures. So he was aces. He was great.
Awesome.
Hey.
All right. Well, let's get into it. We've been talking 20
Sure.
minutes already, but we're going to go in tonight. Sam Siefkes' defense. French is currently working on an article for the key play about some breakdowns on defense. I know you said it's going to be a two-parter, which we definitely look forward to reading, obviously. With the key play, we like reading their stuff, not only for French, but Shelton, who's usually a part of us. But Shelton is completely immersed right now doing work. So we're not going to see spring sports for that young man.
That's going around, man.
Yeah, it is. But let's get into it, French. And the first thing I wanted to kind of break with you is let's talk about position of what we're going to see from this new defense. I want to start with the D-line, if there's certain position names or techniques. But with Sam Siefkes' defense, with what you've seen on tape, studying, what are we seeing for defensive line?
First things first, it's going to be 3 down linemen most of the time.
Okay.
You're going to see a true nose. You're going to see 2, I believe the new what's called now is 4-eye. We call it head up over both of the offensive tackles. You're going to see 2 edge players. You can call them linebackers. You can call them, I've heard jack and spur used as terminology, but it's a boundary side outside linebacker and a field side outside linebacker. Most of the time, they're going to be walked up to the line of scrimmage. If a guy's backed off, it's going to be usually the field side guy because he's kind of lining up sort of like the star does, but sometimes he's splitting the difference between the slot receiver and the edge. And you're going to, depending on situationally, when Siefkes, I hope I'm saying that correctly, was at Wofford, it was a true 3-4, so there were 2 inside linebackers. The Cardinals, when he was there, shifted to the 3 high safety look, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot, which meant 1 linebacker coming off the field. It was usually an inside backer. They did show a little bit of nickel, where the only time the nose would come off the field, they go to 2, like a 3 and a 5 technique, or 2 head up defensive tackles, and still having those 2 edge guys lining up, standing up, but like defensive ends. And then 2 backers. But for the most part, it looked like they were, their base was going to, at Arizona, was going to be the 3 down, 2 edge, and 1 inside backer. Someone we're familiar with, Kazir White, who was at West Virginia just a couple of years ago. In terms of technique stuff, the whole idea behind the defense, it really is to make the second and third level defenders shine. And so the interior guys really are trying to eat up blocks. I think that the hardest position to play is if you're on the backside of a zone and you're the 4 technique, the head up on the backside of a play. You want to keep the blockers from getting to the second level while at the same time not getting washed inside and creating a cutback lane. And that's not easy to do. I think that was the weakness of Arizona's defense, is that backside 4 would get washed inside, and then the edge guys weren't really in position to make plays. Your edge guys, they have to have positional flexibility. You want them to be really good pass rushers. Arizona didn't really have that. They went out and got Mac Wilson, who had a history of being a serviceable, more of a one-dimensional pass rush-oriented linebacker. But the key with the edge guys, they are usually going to force, bring back techniques from the Bud Foster defense. They're going to force, which means taking on blocks with inside shoulder and keeping outside leverage, so the back has to turn back to the inside most of the time. And on the backside of plays, you'll have situations where sometimes they're going to crash inside and a safety's going to come up and become the contain guy. Sometimes they can slow play. Sometimes they can be flat defenders. Either way, it makes it really hard on the quarterback because no matter where you run the ball, the offensive line doesn't really know where the edge, who's setting the edge on the defense. It's not always going to be those outside linebackers. Okay. Now, traditionally, I'm sure, but the next question y'all are going to ask me is, well, if they're going to run 3-4, are they going to have, or the defensive linemen that they've got, are they going to be eating up double teams and, big guys, what you think about when you think about 3-4? And at least at Arizona, they didn't really do that. Sometimes they would bring 5 up front, and those tackles are sort of pinching and condensing the field. Old Dominion did that a lot against the Hokies the last couple of years, where they would try to jam everything up in the inside and then bring up the safeties to make the tackles. Other times they'll slant, and if let's say they're slanting to the boundary, that boundary jack linebacker will bounce off, kind of back up and go into the flat. And then it's the role of the 4 technique is to get to that edge and become either a spill or a force guy. So when I look at the Virginia Tech personnel, nose is challenging. I'm assuming that Gilliam and Copeland, because they're sort of the biggest guys with the strongest base, are probably going to be in that nose role. Are they good fits for it? I don't know. I'm thinking that's why they brought in the Priester kid from Hampton. That's huge.
Yep.
And if he can play, on that level, perhaps he may be a long-term option for that position, but I really don't see fits elsewhere. And then you look at those 2-4 techniques. Emmett Laws is an undersized guy. He's pretty quick. He looked good in the bowl game. But we know he's got quick twitch and can move laterally, so he makes sense for that role. The Arius Nash from Mercer, who, if you all want to see him, look up YouTube Alabama versus Mercer. You can see him against some of the best in the country, and he acquits himself pretty well, especially given how completely outmatched his teammates are. But he's also quick, undersized, 3-5 technique guy who can penetrate. And he was the best pass rusher from the defensive tackle spot in all of FCS. So he kind of fits that role. I wouldn't be surprised if Burgos plays some inside.
Okay.
As odd as that may sound, a guy playing, started at defensive end for the better part of the last 2 years, but I could see him being either inside or out. He could be, more of a run-oriented edge guy, but he could also play in that role. And Stevens is a big kid. He could be in that role. And then you've got the young guys we don't really, Handchuck, we don't know anything about. Johnson, what little I've seen of him, he probably would fit, although if he grows a lot more, maybe he could be the nose. But there's not, I think from the 4 techniques, I think they've got some inexperienced guys. You don't know how they're going to hold up over the course of the season against top-end talent, but they have the skill set. The clay is there. They can be successful. Nose, Gilliam left Oklahoma, so he didn't have to eat up blockers for the linebackers and safeties to be stars, and now that he's going to be asked to do that again if he's in that position. Copeland, we don't really know. Hell of a weightlifter. Do we really know what he is? I know that there was a lot of hype around him last spring, but what I saw of him in the spring game, I was kind of, he wasn't. I didn't think he was particularly disruptive. And then there's a bounce and he gets the interception, and everyone's like, oh. But in terms of every snap, he didn't blow my socks off. And so where do those other bodies come from? And then so you move out to the edge. And that's picture's a little more clear. Ben Bell is a hellacious pass rusher. And he's perfectly suited to line up out wide where he doesn't have to have a lot of other responsibilities. He's not someone who's real accustomed to spilling the ball, so being in position to turn everything back to the inside makes sense. And he for the role, I mean, he's Bryce Pop, Ricky Jackson. I'm showing my age here with some of these names.
I know them all.
Kevin Green, type of outside linebacker who's really one-dimensional. Fred Dean, if you want to go way back. Those guys that they're not really Charles Haley. They're not really a defense, or they're not really a linebacker, but they're kind of standing out like a defensive end, and they're just coming every time. So he makes sense. Everyone has told me that they brought in, I'm going to butcher his name. Is it Jockman or Jonkman? James Jonkman. That was a middle linebacker in Eastern Michigan.
Yeah.
And he looked good. I mean, he couldn't cover a pass worth a squat, but he's a heck of a run defender. But everyone said he's been brought in to play edge, so I assume that's where he's going to be too, because he's, again, the field guy has to be a little more adept at dropping into coverage and playing in space. So I assume those are the two guys at the boundary, which again brings me back to Burgos. Is Burgos going to be the third string guy, or are they going to find another way to get him on the field? And I'm assuming he's probably going to be he'll probably be the four tech. I would assume on the field side, and that way when they're calling pressures where that field side linebacker's backing out into the flat, he can move out and become the edge guy.
Yeah.
And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if Stevens got some run at four technique or the edge spot, but he doesn't look like he's a guy who's going to play in space as well. I think Jason Abbey could be the sleeper guy. If they hadn't brought in two guys with good pass rushing credentials, and Bell in particular, I could have seen Abbey standing out there wide because where he's a smaller guy.
Yeah.
I think he's got some twitch. I watch him on tape and I never hear anybody talking about him. I go, that guy can play a little bit. And when he's played, he's been productive against pass rushing. Runs got work, but if you're lining up like as a 9 tech way out wide, well, you don't have to worry about that as much.
That's
right.
right.
You're not in position to be blocked. So that's the front. I'll pause. I've probably talked too long. I'll let y'all ask questions, and then I can talk about the second level guys.
No, you're good there. That was good information, and I appreciate you going into that. You brought up Stevens there. You brought up Abbey as being kind of guys that you might could see him in the edge. You might could see him at that four technique. Let's talk about the guys with their hand in the dirt. Is this going to be kind of more of a true two gap, or is it going to be some sort of hybrid approach?
It's one gap, but the idea is to create the jam through movement.
Okay.
At least that's what Arizona did. So it's very similar to what Bud did. If you're slanting to the boundary, the idea is to get to the gap, and if you get a hat on you, then you've got to jam it up at that point. But you've got to be twitchy enough that if you get through the gap, go make a play. Arizona didn't really do that. And this is where, and you guys and I talked before we got on the air, personnel wise, I think, it might be long-term that they do want to get to the point where they do two gaps. But at Arizona, they didn't have that personnel, and that's how they made up for it, is move, slow down the blocking scheme, get into position, and try to eat guys up. Because it's definitely when you watch Arizona Cardinals film, you're not seeing anybody on the front line that's making a huge number of plays. It's really is more making sure they're spilling or forcing the ball to Bubba Baker. I might go on record now and say I think Ben Bell might be a better pass rusher than anybody who was on the Arizona Cardinals roster from what I saw of them. They just didn't have a lot of real burst twitchy guys coming off the edge. Mac Wilson was probably the best of the bunch. I don't think anybody consider him a top 20 pass rusher in the NFL. So, I think there's going to be some painful moments, and I'm hopeful that I'm wrong. I'm really excited to see how they allocate those kids during the spring, and we'll see if they can hold up to it. But it's going to be a challenge. It's the first time in 40 years they've had a different philosophy.
Yeah,
I know Justin Hamilton's was a little different, but I mean, it's been one gap, 4-man front for as long as I've been a fan. So, I'm relearning too. All the geometry is probably going to change. Where I watched Bud's defense enough where you could sort of see, that's why the safeties look good when things are right and bad when it's wrong. Everything's designed. They don't have to think. They know exactly where the runner is going to have to go, and make it easy. And I'm learning a new geometry now. So,
all right, Callie, you moved up like you had a question.
Oh no, I'm just paying attention.
All right,
let's throw this back. I was going to throw this back in here real quick. This is obviously a hypothetical here, but would Kelly Lawson have made a good jacker spur in this system, in your opinion?
Good athlete. He probably would have played. And again, I don't know Jack's spur. If it's Jack is boundary. I know at East Carolina when they used Jack was the boundary linebacker, and spur was the field or some other term. I think he would have been field side. I always said I thought he would have been a good star whip using that role. But he's gone. I mean, at this point, I'm not gonna. I wish him best of luck, Sharando kid from Winchester area, but he's not around anymore. So I've got to figure out with what they've got who fits. And it's an interesting question. Field side linebacker, that's one of my two biggest question marks. I do not know on the roster who fits that spot. I'm assuming Woodson's going to be the Mike, playing right in the middle, stacked up behind the nose. For that field side linebacker, they're supposed to be a pass rush type, so can Jonkman do that while at the same time getting out to the flat and sort of bumping a slot receiver? I don't know, and I don't see I don't see Bristol, Tennessee's finest in that Keller in that role. Gabe's not going to be healthy. Clatterbaugh is going to be a Mike right in the middle. I have no earthly idea how they're going to play that spot. In the NFL, that's where Wilson played. He was 6'3", 245. I'm struggling to see where the fit is at that field side linebacker spot. Or for those of us, for people who know the old terminology, what would have been the star? Similar alignment on the field, but it's going to have to be a bigger, more run sound guy because they're going to be playing with a 6-man box most of the time.
Well, Jockman's got the body type you just mentioned. He is that.
If Jockman's in that role and he can get to the flat, then I don't think he came to Virginia Tech to be a backup. So in my article, I wrote that I suspect he will start, but I don't know. Again, I don't know him at Mike in coverage was sort of like watching a bigger version of Brumfeld in coverage. It was kind of painful to watch. But him as a run defender, he knocked your dick in the dirt. He was productive. So
there we go.
He could play. And I said all, and y'all may have seen. I was on Tally. I think I was on your right after the hire was announced on Twitter. Your chat, and when I was on with Pete over at 2 Deep, I said, I mean, other people are saying he's brought to be an edge guy. I'd play him at Mike, and I'd put Woodson at that field linebacker and see if it works. But I don't, I have the rumbles I've heard say that's not the plan. So
what about Bass? Because it's on screen. You already addressed Keller, Woodson. What about Bass?
I know very little about Bass. I want to see the legal issue he's got to clean up and see how that impacts his time. I know he's also coming off an injury and didn't play a lot. He would probably be the one that body type wise and skill set wise would make the most sense. Okay. But I sort of want to see that he's being an active participant and is being given some time before I get a good feel. Same thing. I wouldn't say that Clatterbaugh is going to play right away. And I've seen some people on Key Play on the message board say, "Oh, Clatterball's going to step right in." Oh, no, he's not. If you never expect a freshman to play as a true freshman, you will never be disappointed.
That's right.
Good. Let's go to the back end because
Sure.
let's talk about with the corner. I want to start with the corners because I feel like that might be the least changed. Or
you're dead on. I don't think that I think that Pry inherently wants to play zone, and one of the advantages of the free high safeties is you can disguise really well the middle of the field. And I talked about this at length in my articles. I don't know if it was coaching or whatever, but the Hokies last year's free safeties, lining up 20 yards deep and then dropping another 15 yards where there's no receiver threatening their cushion and just creating a big donut hole in the middle of the field. I never understood why it kept happening. I don't know if it was a coaching philosophy or it was just poor instincts from Mose Phillips and to a lesser extent Jones and Reddish. I thought they did a little bit better job in that situation. But I think that Pry wants to run zone. He did a lot of zone blitzing at Penn State, and this gives them a little better disguise because they were predictable in their zone blitzing next year. Also, I know Lovett looked really good in the bowl game, but asking him to be lockdown man, the old style, boundary corner is going to be on an island the whole game. I don't know if that's something that Pry wants to continue doing. I think it's just been a necessity the last few years where how much they struggled to cover in the middle of the field, so they had to rely on their corners to play out. But I'm assuming Lovett's going to be the starter, and then it's up between Brown Murray from the transfer from East Carolina and Thomas Williams. I'll tell you my sleeper guy. I love Josh Clark's tape from the spring game last year.
Yep.
I thought that kid's going to find a way to get on the field, and unfortunately he did until the bowl, but he wasn't needed to. I wouldn't be the least bit shocked if halfway through spring ball we're hearing that he is taking the position and owning it, and then Brown Murray or Williams are contending to be the nickel that will come in and replace the field side edge guy as a true nickel. In those situations, or maybe as a third safety in those situations, try to match on a receiver. So I don't think you're going to see I think the guys who you expect to play are probably going to play at corner, and Clark is kind of the guy that I'm looking at, that if someone's going to take a big step forward and be a legit second option behind Lovett. That's the guy I'm looking to really grab. Brown Murray's film was okay, but it didn't blow me away. He looked like he's going to be a solid, serviceable guy. So,
French, let me ask you.
Clark's got more upside to get past him.
Yeah, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
This doesn't really have to do with any kind of scheme. It's more to do with skill, because sometimes it just matters about how much talent you have to put on the field. When you look at what the coaches have brought in, throwing scheme out of the way, do you feel like on defense that we have, I don't want to say we're more talented, do you feel like we have more pieces to work with this year than we did last year? Or do you feel like last year's team had more defensive talent as a whole?
So I'm going to cheat my way out of this answer. I do not think that they have two players the caliber of Aeneas Peebles or Antoine Power Island up front.
Right.
And especially Peebles. I've been very vocal on Twitter, best defensive lineman potentially that they've had since Settle, and maybe going back to defensive tackle, going back to Bruce Smith. Right. He was unbelievable this year. And I don't know that because it didn't always manifest itself as he was the one getting sacks, I don't think people realized how good he was. When teams double teamed him and created space for Power Island, that was some of his best games.
Right.
And when he didn't get doubled, he was absolutely decimating folks on the inside.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that those are tough replacements. So I'll go to the second part. They had egregious, horrific holes, especially in the middle of the field at safety and Mike linebacker. And even, I like Caleb Woodson, but he had moments where he really struggled, and the other guys that were coming in to give him rests at times really struggled. Those holes were so bad that they offset a lot of the good that the defensive line was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing in, hopefully Woodson, a year older, addresses that issue somewhat, and also being less reliant on the linebackers to make plays. Because one thing about this defense, the Mike, can make plays. White made a lot of tackles. He just didn't look particularly overwhelming on film for Arizona. But you're not as relying on them to be someone who can eat up gaps and still make plays like Bud's defense required him to do. So the question, they brought in 4 safeties, and you've still got Quentin Reddish, who's very highly touted and I think has a ton of upside. So looking at the 3 safety alignment, generally you're going to see those safeties line up about 10 yards deep. You don't know who's the one or two will come in and run support late, but they won't show it early if they're doing it right. So the offense doesn't really know where that alley player is coming from. Most of the time it's going to be the middle safety. And so when you're looking at skill sets, you want your 2 outside safeties to have some flexibility, the guys playing on the hash, but they have to be able to play deep half, match to deep half. Turn and run with deep receivers because they're going to be playing zone with those corners. And so they brought in, I think Reddish is a fit for the deep half. I don't think he's playing the middle safety Superman type of role. So I think he's probably one. Coville, my friends who are around Clemson football said one of the reasons that he left was he didn't want to play around the line of scrimmage. When he did get a little bit of playing time this past year, he was used kind of like a nickel or like a star in our defensive lexicon. And my understanding is he wasn't real happy about it. Although he played a lot in that role against Appalachian State. I thought he looked pretty good in it. But if that's not what he wants to do, then he's probably a candidate for the deep half. Tyson Flowers, sorry to Tyson and his family if they're watching. I think he's garbage. I wish they hadn't brought him in. I watched a lot of Rice film, and that secondary was as bad. You think our secondary looked bad. They looked like they didn't have a clue what they were doing. So I wouldn't expect a whole lot out of Flowers. The guys I'm looking at for that Superman role are Christian Ellis from New Mexico and Isaiah Cash. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. Cash is as good a form tackler as I have seen on film and doing this for 14 years. Every time he makes a tackle, he's around the ball. Guy goes down, arms wrapped. Even if he's diving at their legs, you're seeing the arms come up above his head, around the hips. It is beautiful. But does he have the size? 5'10", maybe 6 foot, 205, and he doesn't have blistering speed. And you watch Buda Baker, who was used in that role in Arizona. He was a fantastic tackler, great instincts, all the good things that I like, but looked like a rocket ship coming up the line of scrimmage. When y'all see the film review, I'm going to call it out. Like he's running twice the distance as the Mike linebacker. Both are unblocked, and he's beating the Mike linebacker to the ball. So Cash, is he that level of athlete? No, but he's going to be a reliable tackler, which is welcome in the middle of the field.
What about Ellis?
Ellis is more of a volume guy. He's a hitter, not as necessarily as good a tackler. I thought he was going to play the star when I didn't realize that Tech was going to be changing defensive schemes. I thought they were bringing in Ellis to play the star. He's got a little bit more lawn speed, a little bit bigger body. So I think that those are 2 guys. And then who knows? Maybe Reddish would thrive in that role. I don't know, but with his range and with the very limited use of him in a tackling role last year, since they had him 30 yards from the line of scrimmage half the time, I don't know. But long term, the kid from Virginia, incoming freshman Robinson, and I'm brain cramping on his first name. Is it Sheldon Robinson?
Sheldon Robinson. Yeah, Sheldon Robinson from Woodbury.
I know Sherrod Henderson and Sheldon Robinson, I get their names confused, but Sherrod is a defensive end. Sheldon Robinson, watching his film, he plays around the line of scrimmage. He has the ability to turn and run with distance and range. I think long term, this defense was made for him to be a star in. It may not happen year one, and that may not buy time for Pry to get to when he's going to physically mature. And who knows? I mean, again, my freshman rule, but Brandon Faison was ready to play right away. So, maybe he's that guy. But I really, really liked his film. He had range. He hits. He tackles. He plays the ball in the air. I don't know about the level of competition he was playing, but he looked the part. And for what is expected in that role, I should probably get into that. So the entire defense is predicated. Those edge guys set the edge one way or the other. And that middle safety, most of the time, is going to be the one up around the line of scrimmage. And the idea is all those interior guys are keeping him clean. To a lesser extent, keeping the mic clean, but especially keeping him clean. And you've got to have a guy where the biggest difference in Bud's defense, safeties were playing half the field. Your alley defenders only playing the alley to one side, and you've got someone else responsible on the other side. In this defense, in base, and unless they're bringing a specific pressure, that alley defender's got to cover both sides of the field. So they have to read the play quickly. They've got to react. They got to be up in the alley, and they got to put people down because generally the other safeties are going to be dropping back into coverage. So where I'm struggling right now, and Robinson's not ready, or assuming he's not ready, who's the fit?
Is that what I said? I was going to ask you later. Is that what gives you pause right now, based on everything?
That's what gives me the biggest pause. Is this defense is predicated on that middle safety being an absolute superstar. Ohio State did it with 4 down linemen and the 3 high safeties, won the national championship. And we've heard rumors that their defensive coordinator was the guy Pry wanted, and that they were working on trying to bring him in before all of a sudden he elevated his worth with the national championship run. Who do you have at middle safety? Caleb Downs. Yep. Caleb Downs is a badass. Who's the badass? Like who in Hokies history would fit that role?
You tell us.
Maybe Jarrett, Kyle Jarrett.
Kyshawn.
I'm sorry, not Kyshawn. Kyle Fuller. Wow.
Fuller. Yeah.
And right now, any Hokies fans are watching are ready to throw rocks at me for that snafu.
Not on this program. Names are screwed up all the time on this program.
Yeah, so. Maybe Jimmy Williams, but there haven't been a lot of guys. Chancellor, if he had been used that way, possibly. People forget Cam Chancellor really, really struggled in Blacksburg. He was a much better pro than he was a college player, but
he never found his fit until. He never found his fit until he got to the Boom, where they put him at strong, because we tried him corner, free, and then finally Pete decides, wait a second, he's 6'4", he's 230, and he can run a 4.45. Put him at strong and let him annihilate running backs and tight ends.
Yeah,
and he
did.
Maybe he would have been the guy.
About him all the time, and then he became a big time pro. And I love Cam Chancellor. He was great. Hey, I heard the grumbling. I know. I got receipts on some of y'all out there. But yeah, who is that guy? I would encourage every single Virginia Tech fan. You want to see what the middle safety is supposed to look like? Go find Buda Baker highlights from the last 5 or 6 games last year for the Arizona Cardinals and watch that and then think to yourself, man, when was the last time a Hokie defensive back looked like that?
Hey,
I don't know.
We got a Miami fan throwing a good name out there too for this.
Oh, Macho?
Yeah.
Oh, he was a corner. God bless him.
He was a corner, but I think just
good corner.
The way he played, though, I think he could have maybe had a fit here.
Yeah.
I think
Brandon Flowers hit the way Buda Baker does. I don't know if he ever could have run the way Buda Baker. Just, my God, like watching that was like watching Aaron Donald in college and going, people are sleeping. This is the best defensive lineman I've seen doing this. And then he got to the NFL, and all of a sudden he was a huge star. And I'm like, see, I wasn't just making up. Just because we were beating Pitt back then doesn't mean he wasn't killing guys on the inside.
So let me ask this question. Well, I ain't even a question. I'm gonna make a statement.
Sure.
My Hokie fandom and my sanity relies on Virginia Tech having Buda Baker to play on defense next year.
Yeah, I'm a little antsy.
I'm not watching a fucking game. What's the use? What did we do with?
Like I said, maybe. So I'll put on my positivity hat, not my strong suit, but like I said, the Cash kids. If I had to pick my favorite, I think Cash is going to end up being the guy. He's such a good tackler. And he's reliable, and maybe he doesn't have the explosiveness, but I mean, there are going to be a lot of growing pains. This is going to be new for everybody who's returning. It's going to be a different ball of wax. I think some of the transfer guys might end up being more comfortable in the scheme than the returners.
Yeah,
nothing like burping up
one
a
thing.
sentence.
Yeah, well, one thing when Fritz said is, this may not buy pride time. I'm gonna go ahead and let everybody know that's watching this that may watch it tomorrow or the next day. Pry could lose every game. He ain't going nowhere. They're not going to fire him. He just bought himself probably 3 more years by not having an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. So
the worst offensive line I have ever seen.
Get it out of your head if you think that he's going somewhere.
The last 3 years.
He's not going nowhere. Don't even get me started on offense and offensive coordinator and offensive line. We ain't
if y'all want to spend an hour listening to me rip the offensive line from last year, I'm happy to do it.
Oh yeah.
It was,
I mean,
it was bad.
Do a whole
I
episode
watched
on
a lot of Nick Marsh, and it was bad.
And our offensive coordinator went to be an offensive line coach.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. All right, let's get to it. Because I mean, what I've liked that's happened the last about 40 minutes here is, Frank, you did it perfectly, man. You brought players, you brought ideas, but let's get up some of these screenshots that you have and let's explain that because right now you've got my head thinking of, all right, here's Zero, here's Vortex, here's the guys on the edge, there's your mic. I mean, I'm picturing that obviously in a month. Actually, is it a month from today? Spring game?
Is it the 14th or the 12th?
It is the 12th, so exactly
the
12th,
exactly a month, yeah.
So we'll be seeing it. Here we go.
Okay, well, so this is starting out. So as you all know, Siefkes was the defensive coordinator at Wofford. This is a look at when he didn't use an odd front. This is their nickel when they're running at Wofford. And this is one of those situations where, again, it's going to look more like the traditional Virginia Tech defense, with the difference being that both of the edge guys, those are the outside linebackers that are standing up. And this is going to be, more primary pass situations. I don't know how much they're going to do this based on his time in the NFL. Arizona would run 2 down linemen head up on the guards rather than here you've got, a 5 tech to the field and more of a nose to the boundary. But in this set, you're expecting your edge guys to rush. You've got your 2 linebackers and their trips formation, so they're having to roll over the safeties to the outside with 1 deep. But this wasn't something I saw a whole lot of in the film. I included it to show that there's flexibility. It's not going to look like the same. It's not going to look like one of the things that there's not much I didn't like about Bud's defense scheme wise, but with the defensive coordinator the last couple of years, it got pretty predictable where pressures were going to come from. Or they were going to bring the star and they were going to slant everybody to the boundary, and they were doing that way too much, and they weren't bringing the Mike at all. Even though the Mike linebackers really weren't very good cover guys, they would never blitz them. So they became a little bit predictable. So this is just showing that there's a little bit of flexibility. Arizona would run sort of junk-looking defenses where you have a bunch of guys standing around the line of scrimmage and they're all moving around. It wasn't so static like we've become accustomed to the next few years. Okay. So if you want to go to the next Wofford one, I'll show the base defense, base 3-4 that he was running at Wofford.
Yeah, because when I see this, I'm thinking like almost like looking at Jay Bateman when he was at UNC. Like that's kind of my initial look at this.
Yeah, and again, this is a change up. Both of the key thing here is both of the edge guys are those outside linebackers. So even though they look like, oh, these are bigger guys, they're going to pass rush all the time, especially the guy to the field, that's a guy who has the ability to drop. And so you know, they still have to be competent. Your field linebacker still has to be competent to rush, which I don't know that Woodson, you know, otherwise I would say Woodson would fit in that role, but I've never really seen him as much. He certainly wasn't used much as a blitzing guy. So, you know, that's where I think you could see in this look, you'd have Ben Bell as the guy to the boundary and Jonkman probably to the field, or Burgos in this look. All right, so this is Wofford's base formation. Again, you're seeing a nose tackle. He's slightly off. He's not straight head up. But you've got both of the defensive ends are playing what I would call 5 techniques here. I've read, and they keep calling it a 4-eye, even though they're a little more outside shoulder on the guards. You see your linebacker, if y'all watched a lot of the East Carolina games from early in Fuentes' era and end of Coach Beamer's era, they always had the boundary linebacker sort of walked up to the line of scrimmage, and instead of in the Lawrence Taylor pass rush pose, he'd kind of be squatting. They used to call it the Popeye linebacker. Mm-hmm. This is what you'd look like if you had the Popeye pads on in practice and you were trying to prevent yourself from getting killed. You've got your field linebacker. He's a little more off the line of scrimmage and playing about halfway between the right offensive tackle and the slot receiver. And again, this is they're running 3-4, so you've got the 2 linebackers, but you can see the safety, boundary safety is walked up. So again, there's a little bit of positional flexibility. He hasn't started using the 3 safety look. So generally what you're going to see from this, with the way the running back's aligned, most likely run play is going to be inside zone to the right-hand side. What you would expect here, the defensive end or defensive tackle, whatever you want to call it, the 4 technique to the field is probably going to slant right and try to get outside of the shoulder pad, right onto the right shoulder of the right offensive tackle.
Can we do something real quick? For those looking, and I'm lucky, Siegler played offensive line, Talley played D-line and tackle. I've been adjusted. We have our friend Robbie. Field side would be the head of the bulldog.
Yeah. The
boundary side is the feet of the bulldog. If everybody was wondering if you didn't know, well, as he's saying this, I want to clear that up because that is something that I've been taught over the last few years. And somebody be like, who the fuck is he talking about right now? Yeah. Now, there we go.
Wide side of the field and short side of the field is, I'll use that some. But so that defensive end or defensive tackle, I don't know what the terminology will end up being. When it was Bruce Smith, they called it a defensive end in 3-4.
Yep.
But to me, it's more aligned like a defensive tackle. So they're probably going to slant to the left or to the top of the screen or to the field side, whatever you all are more comfortable with. That field linebacker most likely is going to sort of shift out to the flat and become a flat defender. The right inside linebacker is probably going to fill between the boundary, 3 technique, the defensive tackle to the bottom of the screen, and that outside linebacker who's in the Popeye position or kind of looking like he's shrugging his shoulders. And that outside guy is going to become your option defender. So where the quarterback is going to have trouble, he doesn't know if that backside defender is going to crash inside on the zone, and that safety who's creeping up could replace him as the option defender. Could the outside linebacker slow play and just sort of be stationary and slow read the quarterback? Or could that outside linebacker just be coming like a bat out of hell and try to hit the mesh point, focusing more on quarterback than safety? So there's some variability there that makes the quarterback's job more difficult. One of the reasons that this defense is becoming more popular in college football is zone read. And it makes it a little more challenging from a zone read perspective to figure out, all right, who's going to be there waiting for me as the quarterback on the backside. You can do a little bit of sort of a gap handoff where that outside linebacker is going to crash inside. And either, if the safety's not walked up, maybe even the boundary inside linebacker is coming on a pressure, sort of moving to the right and then up the hash and replaces them. So that variability is difficult for defense. I know that there was another article that I saw, and I apologize, I'm not giving appropriate credit, but said that there was a lot of Dave Arnada, who's y'all correct me if I'm wrong. He's at Wisconsin now.
He's at Baylor. He was at Wisconsin when Siefkes was there at the GA.
Yeah. So, but him running this 3-4, that was a lot of his impetus was really focusing on making life miserable for quarterbacks trying to run zone read and make sure that they're not being static with what those linebackers doing. They're not just coming off the edge all the time, but they can. They're not slow playing all the time, but they can, and trying to mix things up a little bit.
Can I ask a question? Just
Sure.
Looking at this, because I see we've got 11 in the picture here, so there's not obviously a high free safety. My assumption is the one on the boundary side above the Bulldog's head is the free safety. But what kind of look could Siefkes come out of this? Because you said he likes disguising coverages. Because I'm looking at this, everybody is within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. There is no one way back. What sort of looks could he give when it comes to this coverage wise?
Yep. So the safety to the boundary could bail and you play true cover 4. A lot of the handoff stuff that Bud was doing where you got inside leverage, outside leverage, and wherever the receivers go, guy comes to the inside, gets picked up. I've read a lot where they want to match, similar to what, some of the articles I wrote about Pry, where they'll run cover 3 over the top and all those linebackers are sort of turning to the outside and identifying first threat, second threat as it comes into the middle of the field and matching to them. And once they get to you, you've got to match up. I don't think that they disguised as much out of this base 3-4 look. But when we get to the Arizona film, you're going to see a lot more deception and different things where it looks a lot like it's going to be cover 3 and it turns into cover 2. I know that's a favorite that they were doing last year. It really gave Caleb Williams a hard time for the Bears. Of course, he's a rookie quarterback, so you expect some of those struggles. But here, I'm expecting, without remembering the play that I clipped this from, I'm expecting probably cover 3 in the back end, seeing that the boundary linebackers probably playing to the flat. I'm sorry, the field linebacker playing to the flat. Safety walking up on the boundary side could either go to the flat or he could bail or he could replace the edge guy if the edge guy rushes, crashes hard to the inside. There's a lot of different variability here.
Yeah, so you're giving, in this case, you got giving the quarterback a lot to think about, both from coverage standpoint and also if you've got the read option call there as far.
And those inside guys, they're all about sacrificing themselves. You're not going to see your defensive tackles or your nose making a huge number of plays. Their idea is those 3 guys, ideally, and maybe one of the 2 linebackers, are going to account for all of those offensive linemen. You don't want to see clean bodies getting down the field, getting anywhere near the safeties. And if you watch, I think there are 2 games where you get some good Wofford film from 2019 when Siefkes was there. And even though they're only running 2 safeties, it's the safeties making the vast majority of the tackles. And you all see that. I highlight some of that in the film review, where you can see really distinct alleys forming, sort of like what Bud's defense did. And their 2 safeties filling that alley, sometimes both of them, sometimes one. But they seem to they understand the concept, where if it's executed up front, they're going to find themselves with a ball carrier 1 or 2 yards at most from the line of scrimmage in a very clearly defined alley. Where I would think the alley would be here, assuming that they do the slant to the field, is I would expect that the left defensive tackle, that 4-tech, he's going to be looking, even though he's trying to get outside, that's hard to do. So his objective is to try to get to the outside to cut that, I believe that's a right tackle, off from getting to the second level. And so he's de facto spilling the ball to the field safety, who would, once he keys run, he would get out of his back pedal and come up and make the play. Or the field guy, he's spilling him out to the field linebacker going to the flat.
Brian?
This would be a lot easier if I had one of those telestrators, but
I need to invest in something where I can do some circling here. Pull a little John Madden.
If you ever do film reviews for a blog, folks out there reading, make sure you got a guy who knows how to cut tape and code in order to just hand you the clips that you picked out for him. Thanks, Joe, if you're watching, because I don't know how to do it.
Anything
if you
else
want to go
this
into
one?
the next one, we can start diving into the Cardinals looks.
Yeah, let's put one on here for my Colts. So,
all right, so this is the Cardinals when they switch to the penny look towards the end of the season. This is a little bit of inverted. You've got, again, your 3-down lineman, nose, guard covered up. Again, in passing situations, Colts are a little spread out, so you can see that boundary defensive tackle to the bottom of the screen is widened out a little bit. There's variation. They're not real static in the way they line up, but generally you're going to see those 3 guys with their hand on the ground. And then you've got your 2 linebackers lined up. Here they're both using very aggressive. They're indicating pass rush. Doesn't mean they're coming. They don't give it away, but you can see the edge guy, the one to the field, he's splitting the difference between the offensive tackle. And if you read my film reviews, you're going to hear that a lot, splitting the difference between the offensive tackle to the field and the slot receiver. You have your 1 middle linebacker sort of stacked behind the nose. That's Kazir White. And the idea, again, those 3 interior guys jam everything up. Your 2 edge guys are setting the edge. From this look, they tend to come a little more often versus backing out. But the idea is to create an alley to one side or the other. And then where they're inverted here, there's the possibility of the 2 hash safeties, the one who's just above the 40-yard line marker, and then the one on the hash mark to the opposite side. Either one of those could theoretically be the 6th or 7th man into the box. I'm sorry, the 7th man into the box. But most of the time, you're going to see Baker up even with him. That's Baker in the middle, a little deeper. Most of the time, he's up. He would be right around the 41-yard line and sort of inverted, looking like a wishbone the other way. Here he's elevated a little deeper. So they may be sending one of the other 2 safeties into the box. But a lot of the time, you're going to see Baker's the one going, even if they do the invert. But they're trying to show a little different here. If you want to go to the next one, you get an even better look at what they were running more often towards the end of the year. So here, same sort of alignment. In this case, the wide receiver is tight, so you can see that the field side linebacker is now to the bottom of your screen, is flexed out a little bit, and he's off the line of scrimmage. But the boundary guy still up in a pass rush position. You can see from the stances of the defensive line, they're not being real squatty and trying to just jam up their gaps. Their feet are a little further back. They've got more forward lean, which means they're trying to shoot up and get into the gap and cause disruption not just trying to squat and take on the double team. Again, you have the middle linebacker stacking up behind the nose. There's a little bit of depth there. The idea is for him to also stay clean. He's not assigned with fitting a gap. Like, for example, Jalen Keller really struggled with that. And before him, Alan Tisdale was god-awful at it the previous year. But the idea, let's say you're running the inside zone to the boundary. Your boundary linebacker is going to set the edge. He's probably going to rush upfield, keeping his right arm free, taking on the blocker. And you're going to see the inside. They can either consolidate or they'll probably slant to the right-hand side to the field side with the backer. Bubba Baker on this run is going to come up between that boundary edge and the 4 technique to the boundary side and fill that alley. And it's the job of that defensive tackle and the edge to take the 2 blockers who are over there and make sure they do not get in Buda Baker's way. And when you all watch my film review, you're going to see Baker up at the line of scrimmage. Look at where the mic is versus him. He beats the mic who's unblocked on this play to make the tackle. Like he's shot out of a cannon.
Man.
And the cool thing about it is I don't know if it's a preset call where he knows where he's going to be around the line of scrimmage and he's going no matter, if they're keying run or pass, or he's just that instinctive and that quick. But they have really set this up to make his skill set shine. So Arizona they put up some pretty decent numbers defensively. This was very bend, don't break, but it made Baker look like a superstar. And when you see their big plays, he's the one around the line of scrimmage. He's ideally positioned to, a lot of college teams like flaring the running back out into the 2 flats. I'm going to cause people to pass out tonight as many times as I screw that up. But he's in ideal position to cover the back going either way into the flat. He can match to circle routes. He's 5'10", 195 pounds. So and he's quick. He's got the ability to lock on in coverage. He can match. So if you're looking at this play and you're looking at the slot receiver to the boundary, maybe you're showing the backer kind of lining up in a passive position, but you want to blitz that backer. He blitzes, then Buda Baker is going to step inside just like he's doing run support. He's going to step right around the 25-yard line, and then he's going to turn to that slot receiver and match. And if that slot receiver comes inside, he's got him. If the slot receiver goes outside, he's going to get picked up by the boundary hash safety. So you have a lot of flexibility. One of the things that they'll do a lot in coverage, they'll run a lot of cover 2, and you would think, well, in the cover 2, it's, in the old 4-3, it's the middle linebacker in the Tampa 2 who's bailing out and covering the post. You would think, well, the way they're lined up here would be Baker doing it. No, sometimes they'll actually take Baker and make him the match defender on slants and stuff coming inside. And poor Kazir White's got to turn around and run to the, I think they call it the pole defender. I've seen videos on cover 2 using the term pole defender for that Mike linebacker. So they'll basically switch position. You'll see that Mike turning and bailing and Buda Baker coming into the flat. He's either the linebacker if they're running, or he's matching to those guys breaking to the inside in the pass game. So it gives a lot of variability. From this look, they could run cover 3 over the top, and the 2 corners basically sit down as umbrella flat defenders. You've got where they're both in press position. You can run, a cover 3, but where they're bailing, and Baker can come up and be run support, and that linebacker is going to run to the flat. I believe that's Mac Wilson to the boundary. It gives you a lot of different options. And one of the things that they emphasize, don't be predictable. Bring pressures from different angles. You're all running the same coverages, but where the cover guys are coming from, you can mix up. And, again, in terms of the run defense, the whole idea, and we saw it, Old Dominion did it last year, and some other team. Duke used to do it when they would run the 3 safety look. a few years ago before the guy who's coaching at Texas A&M now, who I love, and I'm brain cramping on his name.
Elko?
Mike Elko.
Thank you, Mike Elko. Masterful defensive coordinator. God, what I would have, if I could have picked a replacement for Bud, that would have been the guy I would have picked. But before he got there, Duke ran a lot of 3 highs, and it was the same thing. They didn't have a lot of talent up front, so jam everybody up, and 1 or 2 of those safeties was coming into the box right at the snap. But they would line up a pie. You never knew which one it was going to be. And they would play a lot of, cover 0 with a single high. And they would have those 2 extra guys in the box. And, I mean, especially when your offensive line has VT on the helmet, generally they're not going to be very good. So, or at least over a long enough history, all due respect to the 2020 offensive line, which was awesome. But when they're not very good, the chances of them finding a safety that's much, much quicker at the second level is pretty limited. So that's, those Duke teams were very competitive on defense for a long time using that approach. So I think Pry's took on this defense. I think he was interested in the 3 high look, the flexibility it gave. I think he also realizes that from a talent perspective, it's going to be really hard to get the horses up front to have to dominate the line of scrimmage. He's not going to be able to get the same level of talent that he was getting, at Penn State. And even there, his defensive lineman, he found some gems that were probably not the most highly recruited guys. Jesse Lucado was their Mike linebacker, and they would play him at defensive end some. So I think that he's read the white writing on the wall. This is a scheme that will allow it. One, it shouldn't give up a lot of big plays because they have the 3 guys deep. 2, you can sort of use your defensive line as pawns in a chess game and eat up blockers and try to keep second level guys free. And it's a little more intuitive for the second level defenders than the old Virginia Tech defense has been, where you basically have to go where that alley is going to be. And a lot of those big runs where somebody screwed up front and let the running back go somewhere where they weren't supposed to go. And that you'd see the safety was out of position. Well, that's because, someone up front blew the force or spill call, which I think half of what I've written the last 2 years was, let's look at the force and split on this big run. And, it's pretty good to get, well, both the safety and the edge guy are outside. Somebody screwed that up. And it was probably the defensive end.
So let me ask this, Prince, because you mentioned it there, and I was going to ask it in a few minutes here, but I'm going to circle back. Sure. Why is a scheme like this going to be easier to recruit? Because I feel like a lot of people are going to say, well, don't you need a big nose? That's not necessarily the case with some of these UA schemes, right? You don't have to have a 320-pound nose. It's nice if you do, but you don't have to.
It's always better to have 320 who can move than 285 that can move.
True.
But you have to be able to move.
Yeah.
So, a lot of, I don't know, easier to recruit. I think it's going to be different to recruit because, some of the guys they've been getting at defensive end, I think, can play in this 3-4. But like Antoine Power Island, he was used kind of in this role last year as, more of a stand-up off the edge. They would line him up in the middle and move him around.
Yep.
But he really struggled at Florida when they added in the piece where sometimes you're going, sometimes you're running into the flat. I kind of wanted them to keep the defense. I've still got question marks about the fit. I still have question marks about how the personnel is going to work. And we were talking about it for the break. They haven't turned over the staff. I love J.C. Price. J.C. Price has been a even front defensive line coach for as long as he's been in the game. He played under Foster. Where does he fit in terms of coaching defensive tackles to do something that's a little different? They still need to move. They still need to gap fit. But, they're not going to make the number of plays. Could that negatively impact defensive tackle recruiting? As I mentioned, Kevin Gilliam was a fish out of water at Oklahoma where the defensive tackles were asked to eat up blocks. So, how is that going to work? Do they have the Superman recruit at safety who he may not be a 5-star guy because you're not really asking him to play a lot of, sort of traditional deep safety coverage. But you got to find a guy who, is just an absolute badass up in the box. And Trey Polamalu wasn't a deep half guy, but he was great around the line of scrimmage, and that's what you need that middle safety to be. We've talked about the linebackers. Who's the field linebacker? I have no earthly idea. Who's the Mike? I'm assuming it's going to be Woodson. I would put Jonkman there.
Yeah.
Well, I'll probably be wrong. I've been wrong, enough times before. But I have a lot of question marks. It's a big swing. It's high risk. If it works out, they're not giving up as many big plays, and I think that the viewpoint is that gives them a better chance to compete, especially with a better offense. The downside is you have a bunch of square pegs and round holes, and it takes you 2 to 3 years to flip the roster. And Tally, I think you said it right off the bat. I don't think he has 2 or 3 years to turn things around. So it's a big swing, especially when the new defensive coordinator is not bringing in all his own guys that he's comfortable with.
Yeah,
running the scheme.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it earlier. I mean, you talk about fit and things like that. I mean, obviously, I think you wish that Dontari Pose could grow on trees, but they don't. Mm-hmm. A guy that can move like that's in the 320, 330 range in college, you don't really see that that type of player every day. But at the same time, based on your description there, you don't necessarily need those big noses that you're used to from a more traditional 2-gap 3-4 that was so popular in NFL for so long. Let me flip it back over to here real quick and just ask a quick question here.
Sure.
So, you were talking about the field edge here, kind of splitting the difference. If you're going against let's say an ODU that loves splitting those wide receivers outside the numbers, does that put you at any sort of disadvantage with that type of alignment?
I think with those teams that are really heavy, 4 wide spread, they're going to run trips, especially trips to the boundary, which, causes its own headaches. I would expect the nose to come off the field, and you're going to see the two defensive tackles and the 2 edges lined up more. They'll still be standing up, but they'll look like more traditional defensive ends. Mm-hmm. They'll do that a lot, and you'll see a lot of it. That's when you'll see the junk defenses where right here you got Baker 12 yards off the ball. If you watch enough tape, I mean, this is a very limited sample size, they will bring him up around the line of scrimmage as a blitzer. Like, they'll move him all around. So, there's going to be a little more variability. But that's what I would expect, is from a base look, if you're playing teams that are really emphasizing sort of like the Tennessee style spread, I think that they'll go to the true nickel look where they'll take the nose off the field, and they'll play similar to what you saw with Ohio State this year with the 2 stand-up ends, 2 defensive tackles, sort of head up or just offset on the guards, and then you'll have the Mike, right over center. But they'll still have the 3 high safeties. I think that the 3 high safeties is going to be the base defense. That's the only connection I can find between Siefkes and the Ohio State defensive coordinator that they were pursuing originally. So I think Pry definitely sees the 3 high safety look as what he wanted to go to, whether it was going to be Siefkes or somebody else. I think that was his primary target from day one when he started self-scouting and looking at the defense. The interesting thing is, with Mose Phillips' athleticism, he might have been a hell of a fit for it. So him departing, I don't know for sure. He had the skill set, but he played sort of played slow. But he may have missed out on an opportunity to play in a system that really highlighted him more than what they were doing last year did.
All right. Tally, anything right now?
I'm good, man. Just paying attention and trying to see if I can take this test at the end of this class.
Well, there is no like I said, I'm This is an educated guess. You may come out and they're running the same damn defense they ran last year.
Right.
And Siefkes, because he's this young wonderkin who has all this NFL experience, could adapt. But based on what he was involved in, I could not find any tape where he's running, base 4-man front with any consistency. It was just the nickel. No matter when he was at Wofford, when Arizona wasn't doing it. But I'm picturing this, that the only connection I can make between Jim Knowles and Siefkes is they were both 3 high guys. So, I'm 100% expecting something that looks like what you've got on the screen right now as the base defense.
Sure. French, let me ask this. What are the nuances between what Knowles was running at Ohio State and what Siefkes was running?
So the biggest difference is Knowles was running even front.
Yeah.
So it was even front, 1 backer or 2 backers. They went a lot of 1 backer versus Tennessee, and they'd show the light box. And they would have a nickel. They'd have a true nickel, and they'd still have the 2 edge guys. So they would, basically they were replacing out their nose with a nickel defender and going with, I'm trying to remember the term. It was essentially a 7 defensive back look. But, again, they were bringing safeties up pretty heavily. And then most of the rest of the time they're running, 4-2 with 3 high safeties. So, that was the biggest difference. He, maybe fit what Virginia Tech was doing last year, and they were just taking a little bit of a different, angle with it.
Yeah.
Again, they had Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs make a lot of guys look pretty damn good from a coaching perspective. So, I had I was 100% convinced. If you want to talk about something I was dead wrong about. I was 100% convinced either Pry was going to take over defensive play calling duties, or he was going to bring in somebody that he'd had some kind of past experience with that was going to run the same system. I was gobsmacked. When I heard the hire, and 2, I saw, what the coaching background was. I was absolutely shocked. So not that, again, that's not a knock on Siefkes. It's just such a big. Usually, when you change schemes to this level of an extreme, that means you're expecting you have 2 to 3 years to flip the rooms and get the personnel to fit it. So,
and that kind of aligns with where his contract is and where the buyout is and things like that. We figure at this point he's at least got 2 years with these changes that he's made to see where it goes, right? And let me ask you this before we kind of wrap up here. Were you kind of riding the wave during kind of all the whispers of who the hire might be, where it's like it's Knowles, and then he gets on the run, and because it was such a protracted search for a defensive coordinator, much longer than I think a lot of us wanted it to be, right? Mm-hmm. Were you kind of riding that wave and kind of seeing the names that were getting floated out there? You had Knowles out there. At some point you had Jay Bateman get thrown out there, and then eventually we end up on Siefkes.
When I was going through it, like I said, I thought they were going to run the same scheme. So when Anthony Poindexter's name was out there and they had coached together and coached that scheme, I thought, maybe, that's good probably for Virginia recruiting. It's familiar. UVA guy, understood, but, he was a hell of a player. And is obviously a pretty good coach. I thought maybe that he would fit. I know Bob Shoop's name was one that I was watching Tennessee tape on, and they did a lot of the same. They didn't do the alley defense quite the same way, but in terms of how they use their defensive line, and they would try to, they were very clearly doing pre-call, force and spill. It wasn't a instinctive, reactive thing. So I thought that, he would be a possibility. And then when they started floating and I apologize, I'm forgetting his name, but the Tennessee defensive coordinator from the last 2 seasons.
Thanks.
He was doing, a lot of similar stuff where Tennessee had been really bad when Heupel first got there on how they were setting the edge. They really struggled in that area. I think it probably held them back from competing for some titles, even though they had some big-time talent at defensive end. But last year, it really seemed to come together under his leadership, where they were, doing a lot of the setting the edge stuff, and the safeties seemed to have a good idea of where to come up and do run support. So those were the guys I was really looking at. I was actually collecting film clips to get ready to write, reviews on them, especially Shoop and the other guy that had been that was at Tennessee, and the name's escaping me. Poindexter, because he, it's not exactly easy to find a UConn film, but when he was the defensive coordinator at UConn, but I could just go, here's Brent Pry's defense at Penn State. Here's what they were doing. And Brent Pry's the head coach, and he got the job entirely based on, his great defenses at Penn State. And, it sort of made sense. So when he didn't become an option, they took this big right hand. And from the sounds of it, sounds like those were never the guys being considered. But, those were the ones that sort of made sense to me. I know that there were some other names floated where I just went, yeah, that doesn't fit at all. But, I'll tell you, the way my spring has gone, that feels like it's 2 months ago. At this point, it's been, maybe 4 weeks since a lot of this clarity started to come up. So it's hard to even keep track of it. But yeah, those were the guys I was looking at. I'm still surprised. But at the same time, the old defense, I think I had no issues with what Virginia Tech was doing scheme-wise defensively. I had no idea what they were teaching their linebackers and safeties to do within the context of that scheme.
Okay.
I would just watch it and go, I know what they're supposed to be doing, and that isn't it. And yet they're still out there. Nobody's getting benched. Nobody's getting yanked onto the sideline, getting an earful. All teams are doing, okay, any indication that the corners aren't in press man, we're running posts. And there's no safety in the middle of the field, over and over and over again, never an adjustment. So he didn't have the assistants that were doing a good job. That's my opinion. I don't think the players were stupid or slow or anything. So I thought that was a coaching issue. And in terms of talent, he had Micah Parsons, he had Brendan Smith at the strong side, will linebacker. And he never, Woodson was as high end as he got during his recruiting tenure. And that defense just doesn't work unless even Bud's defenses. When Bud had a badass, we called it a backer back then, boundary side, inside linebacker.
Yep.
When you had a badass, the defenses were unstoppable. When you had someone who was mediocre, they were okay. And when you had someone who was really bad, they were still okay. But then you had to watch Lindell Gibson and Jake Johnson miss 10 tackles a game. So that position was really important, and they never got that guy.
Yeah.
If you go back and read when they hired Pry, I said, my God, can they bring Abdul Carter and with him? Because his linebacker film was great, and he was really good as a linebacker. I had no idea he'd become the best pass rusher in the country, but God, what I would have given for Pry to have brought Abdul Carter to be that will linebacker, and maybe we'd be having a different conversation right now.
You might be. I want to ask you this real quick, and I think we'll see if eitherbody here has any more questions. But with this type of defense now, what's going to be the offenses where if we're playing this offense, we should just eat them alive under 20 points. But if we're playing this type of offense, buckle the fuck up, because if we miss one or two play, we're fucked.
Well, and a lot of that's going to depend on how the personnel ends up fitting in.
Yeah, for sure.
Defense
But I'm
really,
saying, so let's say it's an above average. Everybody is above average, and you're shocked. Like we got the Isaiah Cash turns out to be a tackling machine, can get sideline to sideline. Everything is working above average.
Yeah, if you've got a team that runs a more traditional run game, not as much of a zone run game, and your offensive lineman can, take care of that edge guy and get level defenders to the second level, and that means blocking those front three one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got offenses that have offensive lines that can block that front three on one-on-one, there's going to be a little bit of trouble because, again, I don't know that there's the Superman at the safety spot that's, going to be so dynamic that it doesn't matter. He's just going to beat blockers that are trying to get to him, and he's too quick and too elusive and too instinctive. He'll get there before they arrive. Looking at it, it's well suited to zone read, run, spread stuff. I think it's ideally suited to stop that kind of defense, slow developing stuff. If you watch, and I think there is a YouTube video that says Ben Bell highlights. Strongly recommend folks watch it. He is, if you all remember the last two Marshall games, how Marshall's edge guys were coming up the field and it disrupted all of Tyler Bowen's sort of slow developing, run wide. This defense prevents teams from running wide. If it's doing things right, teams that are oriented towards running more sweep oriented stuff, outside zone, this defense is going to give them a hard time. If they can run up inside and dominate that interior three, there's going to be a lot of trouble. So that's what I'd look for from that's what I'm looking for. And Mr. Compton, who just commented, same thing. If you're running the traditional pit offense and team's good at it, that pin and pull power stuff, and you get, create that gap. The weak spot in defense is always going to be between the four tech and the edge guy. If you can hit that seam, especially with one linebacker, it doesn't take much for you to disrupt that linebacker, disrupt that safety, and that backs off for a long way. The idea is to give that Mike and that free that middle safety a free run, and you hope that they can be the playmakers you need at that position. And you sure as hell hope that those edge guys, if they're going to line up that wide and they're a little susceptible to speed draw, off tackle power where you're kicking out the end and they're playing outside in anyway.
Yep.
What you're hoping they'll make up for is because they're lining up wide, they're going to have an advantage on offensive tackles with the pass rush. And again, if you haven't seen Ben Bell play, watch it and you'll sit there and go, yes, quarterback pain. I like it.
It's all coming to plan, right?
It's all coming to plan. Well, listen, French, the last hour, half here has been an educational piece on what we're likely to see next year. Obviously, spring ball starts next week. We know people are going to get in there, and then we're going to have the spring game. How much are we going to see? We don't know. But I think here, based on what Sam Siefkes has done, you have definitely given us at least the 200 level, because I got a feeling as you start seeing real games, 300 and 400 level stuff will be coming out soon. So, Tally, Brian, anything before we wrap it up tonight?
I'm all set, brother.
I'm good to go.
If I could do a quick advertisement for folks who may not know, thekeyplay.com, great community there. A lot of good folks who have a pretty measured attitude about the state of the team. We're not happy when it's not happy, but folks aren't ripping each other's throats out. And I'll do my film reviews, do a couple. We try to take breaks in the off season a little bit. We do some stuff for the spring game, and now with the new schemes, we'll highlight the new scheme, probably do a couple articles this summer. But every Monday, we have a film review of the previous games. Usually we'll do 10 to 15 plays for anyone who hasn't seen it before. We try to go into deep dive and explain, where the blocking assignment may be missed, or is it a defensive call that just was the perfect call against the perfect play call. Try to, assign the appropriate blame and identify opportunities for improvement. And also I take great pleasure in calling out when guys do good things. Like I said, you could say I was the king of the Aeneas Peebles fan club last season, and same with Bayshal Tootin. Bayshal Tootin behind our 2020 offensive line.
Did numbers.
I don't think, and I really think, even though the fan base loved him, I don't think people understand how really good he was, because he had nothing in front of him. It was just bad. In fact, I never have to write the word more other than talking about the offensive line coach now. Moore brothers, Clements, they were so bad. And I
All
say
right.
that I can smell my own because I was terrible too. So
That's right. That's right.
I recognize that guy.
I've sat in film rooms before and have been the focal point of a bad play. So I've been there. It's not a fun place to be. At the same time, you gotta call it like you see it.
Yeah, I haven't had that frustrating a couple of years going back to when Kurt Newsom was the offensive line coach, and you had guys stepping with the wrong foot or being, felt like a full second behind the snap count. It's just little dumb things like that. Just, you're taking the wrong angle or your feet aren't moving at contact, and you just go, that's 8th grade stuff. That's not stuff that should be happening in Power 5 football. And you're watching it going, they're either just got no talent or they're tuning out or coach, is teaching them via Zoom. I know that was proven a false rumor. I don't want to throw stones, but dear God, be better than that.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Well, y'all, with that being said, dear God, be better than that. Let's hope next year's better. We're going to wrap up this episode of the Boundary Corner podcast, brought to you by Counts Family Pharmacy in Blacksburg, along with our guest, French, from the Key Play here. I'm Curtis Wilson.
I'm Brian Siegler.
Jonathan Taylor.
We are part of the College Huddle Network. Check out boundarycornerbt.com to listen to all of our episodes. While you're there, don't forget to follow us, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, favorite podcast source. Again, if you're looking at this one, definitely watch it on YouTube to see some of the photos we had here. As always, we let our buddy down in Roanoke, Jason Long, play us in, play us out. Check him out, jasonlongmusic.com, where you can link to all of his music, Apple, Spotify, his YouTube channels, and his Facebook pages. We appreciate y'all for listening, appreciate all the questions. And as always, let's go.
Hokies.